but we move like Roman soldiers into the wilds of the psyche to fix under a canceling star, Hermes and Aphrodite, sipping on a sunlit juice.
I'm here with Dr. Lawrence Helman, and he's done so much work, more than I'm probably going to be able to get to. We'll try and I have a lot of questions, but I kind of like to have more of a conversation and just see where things go to. And something about the spontaneity seems to be a little bit more authentic and go a little bit deeper. So I don't want to introduce you too much, but one of my favorite things about your work is that whenever I've come across it, a lot of people who say archetypal or talking about archetypal stuff, because I was familiar with your dad's work with archetypal psychology too, and a lot of the stuff that's come out of Pacifica in the past couple of years. But a lot of this stuff gets kind of watered down when you encounter it, to where people are really kind of talking about a cultural layer or their political bias, or their, you can just kind of see that what they're talking about is not really an archetypal energy or really deep, timeless thing. And you sort of sift through the culture to find the stuff that is really perennial, really deep. A samurai and a knight look very different, but what is the thing that is similar in these energies, in a way that's very honest and effective? And I don't see a ton of that, so I don't know if you agree with that, or if that's that. I'll leave it there and then hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Joel, and I do, of course, appreciate that's a compliment. Yeah, I think I'm very practical. I'm a hands-on kind of a person, and I do coaching and leadership development and this kind of work that needs for me to be really practical, things that people can do to better their lives, or to make more sense of the things that don't make sense to them. And archetypes are just a really good tool. It's a way of seeing. I think of archetypes as wearing a certain set of glasses. Maybe you remember in the movie National Treasure, where Nick Cage is stealing the Declaration of Independence, and he needs to find these glasses that Ben Franklin hid somewhere in a chimney, I think, behind a brick. And so these glasses have 3 lenses on each eye, and then when he flips them back and forth in a certain way and gets the right combination, then suddenly on the back of the Declaration of Independence, he sees this map. To me, archetypes are very similar. They're always there, they're always visible, but you can only see them if you put on a certain set of lenses. They're not literal lenses like that. It's a way of seeing. And that's something you can learn. And once you learn that, life becomes pretty interesting. So for instance, the chocolate mousse isn't just a chocolate mousse, but is also then filled with the archetype of the lover, or Venus, or beauty, or seduction, or chocolate, or all those things that belong in that same archetype. Like you said, it's not just the samurai and the knight, but the warrior shows up in every person in some way, shape, or form. Can be your drive, your passion, your sort of instinctual targeting, your force, your ability to defend yourself, all these kinds of things. So we have to look much bigger than limiting an archetype to something that is, a literalism, like it's my anger or it's my inner warrior. That's much too small, even though we have to, of course, give them names. And so we do call that part that you just mentioned the warrior, but it's not limited to warrior. Warrior is a very wide concept. And so there's always the limitation of language. So imagination plays a lot. And the idea is that the words trigger something in the imagination.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about there's archetypes at work, is that one that you use the most? You've got a couple different systems and publications.
Well, I'm an astrologer. I've been an astrologer for 47 years. That's how I see the world. I'm an archetypal astrologer, which means that I see the archetypes that are also represented in the planets as sort of the formula through which I understand the world. Think of the 10 notes of the 12 notes of a keyboard, 5 black and 7 white, that make up an octave. And with those, you can play pretty much any song. And so this is the same idea, that the planetary archetypes, those 10 that we tend to use as astrologers, are sort of the basis, the 10 digits with which you can grasp any situation, describe any any person, anything, any piece of art, anything you want. It's an archetypal way of seeing. Those are the lenses, if you want, or combinations of them. And so that's what I use. Now, we started to, my partner and I, in 2016, started to work with organizations with this work. And so we translated the astrological language into an archetypal language that is more universal and doesn't bump up against some of the pushback against astrology, because it has, a name. It's a way of thinking. It's not astrology that's in the back of a magazine that tells you your sun sign. It's definitely not sun sign astrology. What I do, a professional astrologer doesn't do sun sign astrology. That will be like saying, I'm 6 foot tall and that defines me. There's so much more that defines me than my height. So, besides the sun sign, you have a moon sign, you have a Mars sign, a Venus sign, etc. So the Archetypes at Work model is essentially the same model as the astrological model. It's one way of seeing the world, which is archetypal, but we use slightly different language, and we focus it in its expression to business and to leadership development.
Well, and your stuff, you're working with businesses. I'm a therapist, and one of the things that I've been really loud about for a long time is how much the reliance on pure empiricism, things that we can reduce totally down to, something that is Cartesian and measurable in a number, which I just don't believe the psyche. I don't believe trauma. I don't believe the soul really can be reduced to a number. I love science. I do research and different things. But I've kind of moved into the things that are more conventional wisdom. And there's something, you're saying it's a lens, like it's a mechanism of sorting this energy so that we can understand it and work with it, which that seems to me so inevitable in therapy, whether it's the MBTI, whether it's, Freudian or depth, wisdom of, we learn that, you're lovable from the parent of the opposite sex, but how to be in the world from the parent of the same sex. I mean, therapy's been doing that forever in ways that are not 100% right, or not measurable, or not testable, but they're still effective in helping us tease apart who we are and understand us. I'm sure you've had some pushback from people. I mean, a ton of the stuff I get, if I say that I like Jung, or that I'm using kind of a somatic archetypal thing to connect people to something, I have people say, well, you must believe all this stuff that I don't believe, and it's like, I didn't say that. All I said was that I was using somatic work or something. I don't know. How do you make sense of that?
We all, this is great what you're saying. I agree with you. So look, we all believe a certain way and see the world in a certain way. My father used to say, it doesn't matter what you believe, just be aware what tree you're sitting in when you're believing. And I think that's a lovely metaphor, because as long as we're aware that when we say, I don't believe in what I can't measure, that we are operating from a left brain perspective, this idea that it has to be rational and measurable to be real, that's a perspective. That's a certain tree to sit in. It's not wrong, but it's not the only way to see. And it's just as valid as another way to see. It's just that since the Enlightenment, that way of seeing has trumped and has made everything the right way to see, and everything else is woo-woo or weird or different. But here's what's happening. This is what's interesting, what's happening in the world right now. So we have a absolute dominance of left brain capacity, and that's what everybody needs to do. That's how you get along. That's how you do business. That's how you win. That's how you data-driven, evidence-based, more data is better. Measure everything, and if you just get enough facts, you can make the right decision. That works in a complicated world. Complicated, my definition of complicated is, a car, for instance, is complicated. It has a bunch of simple systems, like the windshield wiper system has, a couple of wipers and a button and a little, a little reservoir and some hoses, and there you go, and a pump. If something breaks in that simple system, you can just replace the part and it works again. And so all of those together makes a complicated car. And leadership in a complicated world works being data-driven to some extent. That's what's worked pretty well for the last, several hundred years since the industrialization and so on. However, today we're no longer in a complicated world. We live in a complex world. And the difference is emergence. Things happen overnight that change everybody's playing field. For instance, COVID or the wars, because we're so global and everything is so connected, supply chains, et cetera, everything interacts with everything else. It is a different playing field. And complexity is that capability, what we call complexity capability, to deal with the things that are not linear, and that aren't, predictable, in that sense that if this happens, then that's going to happen, or these are the 7 possibilities, we're going to pick one, and so forth. So complexity capability, and this is the cool thing, is a right brain capability that belongs into the realm of those things that aren't measurable: imagination, creativity, dreaming, sitting still and waiting for something to pop into your mind, listening, reflecting, those kinds of things. Those are right brain capabilities. And I know this is not literal. It's not that the left brain does one thing and the right brain does one thing. But this way of thinking is very commonly understood, what a left brain and a right brain capability is. So the unmeasurable world is actually suddenly incredibly important. The second thing has happened, that about 18 months ago, AI popped up on the scene, and leaders are now suddenly dealing with AI. AI can do left brain a gazillion times faster than any leader in the world. And therefore, a lot of the left brain skills, like being able to take massive amounts of data and analyze it and then come up with a solution out of that, can be done way faster by a computer now. And so that's another reason why leaders need to activate their right brain. In other words, if you look at Harvard Business Review and what are people talking about in leadership, everyone is now saying we need to activate our right brain. Gallup just did a thing on this. Everyone is talking about this. We need to activate our right brains because we want to operate with a full brain. So when someone comes to you and says, what, you believe in all that stuff that I don't believe in, basically you can just tell them, I believe in a whole brain. And it sounds like you only believe in using half of your brain. That's all. That's the argument. It's not that one's right or one's wrong. It's how are you preferencing what you're looking at? So yes, certain things that you and I believe in, if you want to call it that, like the importance of dreams or imagination or fantasy or these kinds of things, where creativity takes place, by the way, all of this is not measurable, and it is just as real. I'll give you something in business that is not measurable, that is incredibly real. It's called trust, right? Trust. Any business leader would say, oh my God, I really have to have trust. If people don't trust me, I'm not going to have a business. I'm not going to have employees and stay, and so on. So trust isn't measurable, but it's very real. It's very tangible in that sense, that it's real. So that's a right brain capability. So these kinds of things. So all we're advocating for is to develop people's right brain capabilities. I'm also very much in favor of left brain. I love left brain. I love that we have science and that I have an engineering degree, that we can have, clean water and do good surgery. That's all wonderful, of course, but it's not enough. It's only half of reality. And in this complex world, we have to use our whole brain, and we need to learn a language to do right brain development. And guess what? That's exactly what Archetypes at Work does. It is a language that develops people's right brains and gives them access to their creativity through their imagination by understanding these inner patterns that are what guide us through life.
It's interesting, the quote about trees that you mentioned. I think, and you obviously know your father better than I do, so please correct me if the intuition is wrong here. But I came to Jung by all of these tapes. It was this digitized thing of tapes that were once analog from the 70s and 80s and 90s of all these talks different people gave, and some of them were James Hillman, your dad's, and the quote. I feel like sometimes he was thinking about trees without even mentioning it, because he knew a lot of languages and he knew a lot of methods of philosophy and epistemology that he kind of saw as branching off. And there's one time where it came up where he was kind of reassuring somebody he was reassuring someone who was telling him that his presentation was bullshit. Basically, it was like kind of a cognitive therapist in a 90s recording who was like, I don't know why I'm getting a therapy CD for this, and I don't understand what this has to do with patients or something. And he was saying, like, all of epistemology and philosophy, it branches off and it branches off. And, a ton of the reason why we experience these things is just to say, well, I like Spinoza. I don't understand Plato. And this is the way that I think, and to find our way of thinking. So I'm so glad that you found your way of thinking or something. And I don't
exactly.
know.
Yeah, that's the same thing. That's a beautiful example and a great story. Exactly. It's not, we have to stop thinking that our way of thinking is the right way. That's where it gets tricky. Or that the other person's way of thinking is the wrong way. That's where it gets tricky. They're just in a different tree. It is important to recognize consequences of our thinking, though. And so if my way of thinking thinks that everything that is right brain is wrong, then I am consciously and actively excluding it. I could also say I'm not comfortable with it, or I don't know much about it, or I'd like to know more about it. That to me is more interesting. And somebody who is all in their right brain and knows absolutely nothing left brain, that's rare, but you do find those people. They're pretty weird too. They're probably sitting on Goa smoking pot, on the beach.
Yeah.
So in India. So maybe that's also to me that's not fully functioning either. But a fully developed brain, operating with all of it, with both sides, is really what is necessary. And that means getting into those mysterious and dark and moist places that a lot of people don't want to go to, that are not rational, not measurable, not so easily explainable, but just as real and just as true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you do see the people who hide in the metaphorical, mystical side of the brain, probably around Jungian things. I mean, that's one of the big criticisms of a lot of the applied Jungianism, was that, they feel like they ignore the material reality that, in the 70s, they said we're going to change, ecofeminism in the world and manifest these things. And they did a drum circle, and the Reagan Revolution still happened. That's something that a lot of kind of left people criticize the Jungians for. And I would kind of agree. I mean, I'm in that Edward Edinger camp of, we've got two parts of our brain. They don't really want to be in the same head. And we're going to hide in the one that we're bad. We're going to hide in the one that we're good at, because we don't want to deal with the one that we're bad at. Is that related to what you're saying?
Yeah, but that has a cost. People don't like costs. There's a huge cost if you avoid your right brain, and or think that's what I do in my private life, and at work I just do my left brain. That's incredibly split and really doesn't make for a full human being. Then you're not showing up fully anywhere. And that I've seen, in my practice, I've seen that kind of behavior many, 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 many times, and that's not fulfilling for people. And then there's always something missing. Either they feel like they're a robot at work, and it's just mechanic, and I'm just here to make a paycheck and get in and get out, and then I go home and have my feelings, or they are so completely wishy-washy in their feelings when they're at home that they have absolutely no structure on them at all, and are completely subject to someone else's whims or stuff like that, codependency, you name it, those kinds of things, because there's no way of rationally engaging with their behavior at home. So if that's the case, that's not a life I would like to live. I don't want to leave half of myself at the door when I go to work. So I think, showing up fully. And the number one thing we get when we use this Archetypes at Work model with large corporations and people working in them is that people say, I've never been seen this way. I've never been talked to in this full way. I've never been sort of recognized for my fullness. I've always been seen for my skills, or for my technical abilities, or for my job description, but never as a human being. And in today's world, where I think the last Gallup poll, 60 or 70, some incredible number of people would like to change their jobs within the next 6 months. This was last October, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on this, but it was in those ranges. Is extremely. Imagine for a hiring manager, or for any kind of a leader, the costs of that kind of a turnover. It's unbelievable. So, and that was when the market was really good for jobs and so on. Now it's gone down a little bit again, so a little bit harder to get jobs. But the point is that people aren't happy at work because they're not being fully seen, and they're just doing a job. And so people want to change, and they're in the hopes they're going to be more seen. And we're rethinking what work is about completely, mostly because of AI.
Well,
right
and
now.
I think that's one of the real beauties and benefits of adept psychology and any kind of parts-based psychology, is that you're able to really reach in, and somebody wants to come into the room and talk to you as, the logisticon, or their logical faculty, or they want to talk as, the CEO or the warrior or whatever. And you say, no, I want to talk to this part of you. And you start to talk to this part that they're not used to conversing. And all of a sudden you've exposed and made room for something that you're helping them understand. Not every kind of therapy can do that. And the risk, I think, of some of the post-Jungian things where they systematize too much. Like I don't hate IFS. I mean, I think it's better than a CBT or something, but you're not respecting these things as just energy. And so you're starting to have to judge them. Like, I hate the term protective part. It's like, no, it's just a part.
Thank you. I have
yeah.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear this from a therapist. I have the same thing. I think internal family systems has the ideas great, that we have multiple inner voices and they speak to each other. That's great. But the actual labels that they use are very, very difficult for me as well, because
I
they are
can't think of a
judgmental.
bigger waste of time than trying to get somebody to tease apart the energy that they're feeling right now that we could talk about. But is it a firefighter or is it a protect? Like, stop! What? That's the wrong part of the head. Don't put them there. Like, they're thinking
Is
about it now.
That's quite brilliant, Joel. I've never heard somebody explain it to me that well. I always knew there was something weird with the labeling that I didn't like, but let's also give it credit, because it is a system of inner multiplicity. It
Yeah.
is a system of talking to parts of yourself. It is a system that understands complexity.
Mhm.
And this whole thing about having more than one voice inside, developmental psychology typically says you're this, first you crawl, then you walk, then you run. That's pretty much the model of most developmental psychologies, and then behaviorism, just comes in there, and that's all about how are you behaving in a particular one of these phases. But all of these models have one thing in common: they think of a human being as being singular inside. I am
Mhm.
this. And identity, the whole thing of identity, then you can get into identity politics and all these things, but these whole things that I am, that's what gives me strength, my ego, is from an archetypal perspective a bunch of baloney,
Mhm.
because there is no such thing as an I. There are I's. There are multiple parts in us. And by the way you can easily show this to someone who's a big believer in that interior I, that singular I. Have you ever had a conversation with yourself? Well, of course I did this morning. I was wondering if I should have toast or cereal, or I was, and then should I have this or should I have that? But of course, that's kind of a joke. But if you're like, should I stay with this person? Should I leave this person? Should I keep this job? Or what about that? I could take this job, but I have all these options. Those conversations, weighing the pros and the cons, you can't do if you're a singular identity. You can only do that when you step away from yourself, whatever that self is. So to me, you're stepping from one inner character to another inner character, and they're having a conversation. And if you can identify who these characters are, that's very useful, because then you know how they make decisions. Is it the dreamer and the storyteller? Well, one's going to tell the other one a great story, and the other one's going to go into dreams and maybe not be so practical. These are useful things to have as you recognize how we actually feel ourselves. We are peopled inside. We are not singular inside. There's this lovely quote. I have it in the beginning of one of my books, this wonderful quote by Charles Simic. He was the poet laureate in the United States a couple of years ago. He wrote, "We do not live most of the time in exalted states. The content of our stream of consciousness is usually not so lofty. Our psychic life is more like a squabbling theatrical company trying to rehearse a play we don't know the name of." That's really how it feels. There's this inner mess. Most of us can immediately relate to that. Now, when I wrote my dissertation, I found, you always have to find the counterpoint, the counter voice, and I found a bunch of psychiatrists who were very, very afraid of this. Oh, don't talk about multiplicity. That means split personality, DID, dissociative identity disorder. That's a completely different thing. That is an illness and has nothing to do with the way of speaking that we speak now. And to equate one with the other is incredibly naive and incredibly simplistic. Multiplicity, inner multiplicity, is how human beings have thought about themselves for eons. If it was inner gods or multiple gods or outside and then reflected inside, if it was these, the gift of depth psychology has been to bring us this inner multiplicity. That's really been the greatest gift. And then Jung gave them names and called them archetypes by looking at them globally. But this is the big thing. I just met a psychiatrist the other day who wrote an article, and I connected with her because I've been writing about inner multiplicity in leadership, and she wrote one about, from a psychiatrist's perspective, that maybe inner multiplicity doesn't mean dissociative identity disorder. It could really mean, a richer way of thinking. So I'm very interested in this sort of movement that's starting now. And well, it's been going on for a while, but now it's getting some traction. That inner multiplicity is good. There is a language for it. In our case, we use archetypes based on the planets. To me, that's a very solid foundation. 5,000 years of data, if you want to use left brain just to quantify that, of what the planets mean, for a person. And so it's a tool.
You mean that there's, perennial patterns that we can go back and look at these things popping up? Because that's my argument when people say, well, it's not empirical to look at mythology. It's not empirical for you to look at these gurus and mystics that you're writing about on your blog. Why are you writing about Martin Buber? Why are you writing about Meister Eckhart. And I'm saying, like, because when somebody invents Buddhism in the middle of medieval Germany, that means that there is some part of the brain that produces this, because Meister Eckhart didn't go study in Japan, or he didn't go study, in Thailand. And so that means that this is a description. People are universally arriving at these places because of archetypal or some kind of inborn thing. And I don't care where you think it comes from. You can have a woo-woo spiritual metaphysics. You can have a scientific, genetically deterministic, biological deterministic metaphysics. I'm just pointing out the pattern, And if you can't see the pattern, or that seems more empirical to me than people want it to be.
But isn't that a strange question to ask you? Why would you study Eckhart, or why would you study? In other words, to me, you're a psychologist. As a psychologist thinking person, you would ask yourself, what is that person so afraid of? Why are thoughts dangerous?
Yeah.
Well, thoughts are dangerous because they might actually open up a part of myself that I'm terrified of. It's like, I'm never going to fall in love. I'm never going to fall in love. Oh, damn, I just fell in love. Now what? It's like, it's these things. People are so worried that because you can't measure it, it's not real. It's just, someone says that to me, why do you study that? It's not even empirical. I burst out laughing. This is the conversations going on in research between quantitative and qualitative research. Someone who's a quantitative researcher who only believes in analyzing data, on massive amounts of data, and finding truth in there, is going to say that every kind of qualitative research, which is what the human sciences use, is invalid. And so, it's two minds that don't meet, but they're talking about two different sides of the brain and two different sides of perceiving reality. And meanwhile, there is, tons and tons and tons and tons of very valid research done on from a qualitative perspective. So I don't get engaged in a confrontative argument. I think it's a waste of time. It's like, stay in your tree. That's fine. Just be aware that you're in a tree. I don't have a problem with that.
But even if you want to stay in the realm of the quantitative, they don't give Jung and Helman like the credit that they deserve. Now that we have QEEGs that say it's not about the part of the brain, it's about networks that you're activating of deep somatic emotion that is coming from the brainstem in a theta wave, and this is how you experience being assertive is the warrior. This is how you experience being passively controlling. These are your emotions obsessed. One of them is good, one of them is bad, one of them tightens my entire back because I have trauma around that. It's these networks of deep somatic and emotional memory, and the same people, same people who said that Jung was kind of complete BS and published those papers in the 90s are publishing now and saying, oh, well, there's primary, secondary, and tertiary memory. There's first order, second order, and third order thought processes. The third order can only really be engaged through the body and through symbolic content. It's like that's what they're publishing now,
right?
But they weren't wrong.
But yeah, here's the thing: people are when you think about that makes Jung's work even more interesting, because in a way he was doing all of this before we knew everything that we know today. So we have to keep that in mind. Think about when people who attack Jung for not being feminist enough or so forth. Everybody's influenced by their times, of course they are. And I agree, a lot of what Jung says is painful. It's like scratching a blackboard in the wrong way with your fingernails.
I'm not sure if you can still hear me, but you've frozen for a second. So I'm waiting for the connection to catch up.
Are we good?
So I can hear you now. It cut out for just a second. Last thing I heard was scratching of the fingernails. Sorry.
Oh, yes. I said, some of what Jung said is like scratching fingernails across a blackboard. I get it, but that's in today's context, because we now have feminism, we have enlightenment in lots of areas that we didn't have before, in right brain capabilities and understanding of that anima is limited to the man and animus to the woman. These kinds of things is pretty limited. So but it doesn't mean you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. It doesn't mean that what Jung said wasn't absolutely brilliant and mind-blowing and trailblazing. That's the key. The other thing is that most people who criticize, for instance, astrology, I've heard so much criticism about astrology, have absolutely no idea what they're criticizing.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, Newton had a famous, because Newton studied astrology. And Newton had a famous line somewhere, when some other scientist said to him, "Oh, astrology is nothing," and he said, "Sir, I have studied it and you have not." That's all he said. And so it's like, to me, I have no problems with somebody who really knows astrology to say, "Oh, it's a bunch of baloney," but to outright say there can't be a connection between the planets and us, it surprises me how afraid people are about those things that they can't measure. And it's as though if you say you believe in astrology, that immediately makes you a weak, a gullible, because most people associate astrology with crap, which is what's in the back of a magazine, which has nothing to do with real astrology. So, pop psychology is also very crappy. I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert, really doesn't mean very much. And these sort of simple labels, I'm an Aries, I'm a Libra, doesn't really mean anything. It's a complexity, and to really be able to say, I think it's a bunch of baloney, that's fine. But please study it enough to make an intelligent decision and to have some intelligent arguments about why it's baloney, rather than just because it can't be. That's a really bad argument to me. Just can't be that there's a connection. That means you've not studied it, how that connection actually works, or what that actually is, or how we can look at the planets to get some answers. That's just, quite intelligent people have been, giving a lifetime to studying astrology and have come up with some very interesting insights, and that's worth studying. So if somebody's interested in that, study it and then make a decision if you think it's worthwhile or not. But don't dismiss an idea.
How can anything that cracks us open and shows us the way, different parts of our self, and gives us a different vantage point on the way we think and make decisions, be a bad thing, no matter where it comes from or what you think about the scientific materialism? I mean, a lot of astrologers have to have, if they're licensed a certain way, they have a therapist that they refer to, because astrology can't treat certain things. And so, just as part of networking, when I opened this, I saw Mandy Ray in Birmingham, a couple people, and I was starting a integrative holistic medicine clinic that was brain based and depth psychology, and that was I'm a social worker. It was expensive and it was a real stressful time, and it was incredibly helpful. I don't know a ton about astrology, but the perspective when they were explaining how I could think about things and things that I should look for and things that I should respond to, it made me engage with my life in a way that was very helpful. Tarot is similar. Some people use tarot, to confront a problem, that the I Ching. I mean, this stuff is so old. Why is it so threatening to people to give up that control, and look at themselves from a different perspective than they're clinging to?
Because they're afraid of being called a feeble mind, or gullible, or these kinds of things. Meanwhile, people are extremely gullible by data as well. So anyway, I think it's great to just make the point, let people decide for themselves. I'm here to tell you that astrology is not some kind of a strange woo-woo thing that you can't learn. It's quite rational. It can be learned. And yes, to some extent, there's a difference between being a great astrologer and being a good astrologer. And that is the same difference as being someone who plays the piano well and plays music. There's an art part to it that is right brainy, and that you can't learn, but that is kind of a talent and a gift, just like with anything else that you're good at. Same in medicine. There's something about being the best student in med school and being a fabulous doctor that's not necessarily the same thing. There's another part to healing that is not necessarily measurable. Maybe bedside manners. How do you measure that? Those kinds of things. So it's just that I would like to take some of the stigma out of astrology, because it has such it used to have, it's changed a lot. I read a few years ago that astrology was the second most Googled word on Google after sex. And so I was quite impressed by that people are really curious, especially young people really want to know. And, they want to know, and often it stays with their sun sign, but at least it's a way to think about themselves. Fine. It's a limited way, but it's better than nothing. It's starting to think that they have a connection to the universe, to their birth minute, and something happened at that moment that continues to unfold in them. And I think that's an interesting way to live, rather than I'm just here a random speck of dirt in the universe. So meaning making is something very important for human beings, and we find our own ways to make meaning. Some people make meaning through a lot of data. That's fine. Just be aware that that's your mindset.
Yeah, I was in Spain with my family this summer, and we went to the Dolmen Dominga, this Neolithic portal tomb, and you're looking at this thing that is just unbelievably old. That somebody moved 180-ton rocks to make this long tunnel, so that exactly at the winter equinox, the light would shine all the way down to the very tip of this tomb and touch the bones, that were in the end. And uh, just it's one of the first things that we did. You could look at somebody who, there's a mountain, there's a storm, I can build a house, but it'll burn down. I can tell a story, but it'll change. And then you see you that birth of architecture, where you build this thing. The psyche is completely different, because using math, using intuition, using logic, I'm now talking to God. This 180-ton monument is going to be here forever, from my mind, and it's connecting me to this timeless order of cosmology. I was able to predict the sun, how that moment of change, that's like one of the moments we came alive in it, and it had to do with the cosmos, with the astro.
Very beautiful. And Joel, I think every religion started out, well, religion in general started out as sun worshipping, because the sun was the giver of life. It's pretty natural to then make sun, Ra, or in the Inca tradition, these were if you were sitting in your cave shivering and the sun didn't come up the next morning, you'd be dead. No food, no light, no nothing. So this idea that you would worship and ask the sun to come back every day makes a lot of sense. So religion started out as sun, and then sun gods, and so on. And the honoring of the sun and the moon, and many traditions are based on the moon. And they're regular, they're predictable, we know where they are at any given time. And so we set our calendars according to them too, in a very sketchy world. That is always reliable. We know where the sun's going to be at any given time. We know where the moon's going to be at any given time. So we can organize our chaotic lives according to them, which is why every calendar is made that way.
Could you let people have some examples of how the archetypes at work could help them directly with leadership, if they're doing executive coaching, if they're doing mentoring, if they are a business leader, therapist?
Yeah, I'll give you sure.
How you apply these good ideas.
I'll give you a corporate example, and I'll give you a personal example. First, the corporate example. An R&D department, research and development department, had about 30 people in it. And the leadership looked at the numbers, and they found that they'd been giving this department millions of dollars over the last 5 years, and nothing really came out of this department that was useful. And so, the first thought, what should we keep them? Should we fire them? What should we do? Do we have the wrong people? Why, this isn't working? They should be inventing stuff and so forth. So, or improving stuff or whatever. So they called us in. We did an assessment on everybody. We have an archetypal assessment, and found out that nobody in the team, not a single one of them, including the person who led the team, was comfortable with their inner renegade. Was in there. We ranked them by how comfortable am I? Am I really comfortable with this one? Is it kind of center stage in my life? I can easily step into it and show it to the world, or is it kind of off stage taking a nap in the green room? So none of them had the renegade in the top 3. So we gave them this report to leadership, and they're like, well, I guess, in the old days, what they would have done is, let's fire these people. We have the wrong people. They're not renegade enough. They're not. The renegade is that part of us, in all of us, that is the inventor, the creative, outside of the box thinker, doesn't mind the rules, goes out and does different things. And so we said, actually, you don't have to fire these people, because we know that everyone within them has an inner renegade. It's just that for some reason they're not activating, they're not showing it, maybe they don't dare, maybe they're afraid if they, stick out too much, they'll get fired. Maybe they were told as a kid, don't ever, break the rules. Doesn't matter why. We don't care why. We just know that right now, nobody's showing up with the renegade center stage or sort of comfortable. So instead, we go in and we do a renegade activation workshop with that team. We did that over about 2 days. They loved it. It was a lot of fun. And within about 6 months, that team invented something rather well known. So they broke out of their own limitations. And of course, leadership was delighted, because it costs them way less to activate an archetype than it does to fire everyone and hire new people, and then start all over again with a new team. So that's a practical example of how activating an archetype in a team, because you can do a team assessment as well and find out what is this team not so strong on, and what is this team really strong on, and that they might overplay, and so on. So And a personal example is someone who, is a woman who wanted to activate her warrior more because it was at the bottom of her comfort list. She wasn't comfortable with it for a lot of historical reasons, which in coaching you get into deeper things, why someone might not like that. In a business setting, you usually don't. But in this coaching with this woman, there were a lot of reasons in her childhood and in her past that, coming from a war-torn country and so on, where the warrior was not seen as anything she really wanted to access. Very well understood, but she also saw the cost of not accessing that part of herself. And so we did a whole bunch of work, and that means, giving her homework every week and doing certain things and writing things and reflecting on this, that, and the other. And it completely changed her marriage, for one thing. She was just about ready to leave her husband when that started. And then, now it's all, going really, really great, and they're communicating. It's a whole new thing. And that would never have happened had she not found that inner power to speak up for what she needed and so forth. So it's a lovely thing. And she had externalized a lot of it. Her husband is very warrior sort of type, and classic sort of that sort of, goes out and gets what he needs and does, and is good at business and these kinds of things. So she's learning that she doesn't have to give that away. She can actually own it and have an honest and serious and good conversation with her husband in one place, but also her other life with her kids and with her work and everything else also changed dramatically over the last about 6 months of coaching. So this is a practical example of how activating an archetype can help you. It helped her in her career. She has a business. It got much better there. People weren't walking all over her because she now had, her own power back and things like that. So there are no good or bad archetypes. It's just how comfortable are you with them, and are you able to express them in a productive way or not? So that's the thing. So the way people can get to know more about archetypes at work is to go to archetypesatwork.com. And then they can connect with me directly and tell me what their needs are. Is it personal coaching? Is it a corporate thing? Is it a leadership team? Is it a board that's not functioning ideally? Is it an intact team? Is it just a bunch of people who are not an intact team, but they're all in the same organization? There's so many ways to approach this. All archetypes at work starts with a problem. What's your problem? Like in this case, the R&D department isn't inventing anything. That's a problem. We have high turnover. That's a problem. Nobody wants to work here. That's a problem. We can't find more people. That's a problem. In other words, we're not attractive. Our lover isn't really at the forefront. People aren't wanting to work with us. These kinds of things. So we then translate the problem into an archetypal pattern and then think about ways to solve it. And what would that mean with different options? And there's a team of people who are trained. We have a guild of practitioners. These are people who are trained by us who can go out and do the work and are licensed to do it and know it very well. They've done a lot of training to get, capable to do the work well. And so they can find someone on that page as well, and who can help them. I think we're speaking 11 languages amongst us now, the guild members. And so it's quite global, and it's quite, I've translated the work into about 16 languages at this point, including just got Swahili, which is kind of cool because it's the most spoken language in Africa. So this is a language that is easily understood because archetypes are universal. It doesn't matter if we're working with yam farmers in Africa, which we have, or with engineers in India, or with a small team of professionals in the United States. It makes absolutely no difference. Archetypes are universal. Everyone understands them. Everyone has them, and we can activate them. Think of archetypes as the human genome of the soul. It's that which connects us all. It's what we all have in common. Doesn't matter what we look like, where we are, how we speak. It's a soul thing that appears in images that we all recognize. Like you just said, we can make the connection between a knight and a samurai and a GI. We can make that connection because we have that archetypal I in us.
And you see, what would be called maybe trauma or life events blocking those things. Like it sounds like in your one of your examples, you were saying that the warrior was being blocked by that fear of being the abuser, or fear of being the aggressor. If I admit that I'm angry, or activate anger, or become assertive, then I'm going to be the person who hurt me. Do you see patterns like that in the work when you're
Absolutely.
helping?
So every archetype, it's a great question. Every archetype appears on a scale. In the middle is what we call the optimal zone. That's where you get the gifts of the archetype. So for the warrior, that would be assertive, clear, able to defend yourself, able to stand up for yourself, hitting a target, being, having a goal, those kind of things. That's all the warrior in the optimal zone. Being fired up about something, those kinds of things. You can overplay an archetype in what we call shadow of too much, and then the warrior quickly becomes a bully and a screamer and a yeller or violent or these kinds of things. You can also underplay the warrior, and then people walk all over you and you can't defend yourself, and in a meeting you appear weak, and these kinds of things. So the key is to recognize where you are on that scale of too much and too little. And there's almost always, we have, if we're very comfortable and we're operating in the optimal zone of an archetype, it is still very common that on a bad day we'll overplay it and we'll flip and we'll become too much of it. Or if we don't have access to it, that we pay a price for it, that there's a cost to us for not having access to one. So it's a learning process to find access to all the archetypes. A full life, to me, and good leadership requires conscious access to all 10 archetypes. Just being able to, in a certain situation, know what it's there. Someone comes into HR, you've got an HR problem, you need to be in your nurturer who cares and listens and makes the other person feel important. You going out for new business, probably a good thing to be in your storyteller and warrior, in that combo of some kind, because now you can tell your story, but you're clear and you're ahead and you're not afraid of competition and these kind of things. You're trying to organize your business or your warehouse is a mess, probably good to get some strategists and warrior together, because strategist knows how to organize things and put them on shelves. I've never met anybody who has all their 10, sort of perfectly organized. And so, in the optimal zone, we're always have something to learn. There's always something that's at the bottom of our comfort zone and something that's at the top of our comfort zone, and it's an alive thing. Our personality changes over life. But the ingredients of the personality doesn't. But how we put it together and how we're comfortable with it, that's what we have agency over.
Yeah, when I was before I encountered your work a couple years back, I would do this somatic and experiential kind of archetypal experience where I wanted people to feel the warrior in their posture, before they went into a certain situation, how it showed up for them. Is there any kind of physicality like that to it? And then two, another part when I did that type of therapy, I would help people kind of sort them. If somebody didn't think terribly metaphorically or symbolically, I would sort it in terms of motivation and be like, the warrior is motivated by uncertainty. How far can it run the ball? How many people can it defeat? Can it get the gold medal? The magician is going to be motivated by having certainty. It wants the certainty of, I'm going to sit back and figure out how every single person in this room thinks, and then I'm going to tell a joke that makes all of them laugh, not just these people. I'm going to sit back and figure out how the girl at the bar, or how the boss thinks, and I'm going to stand up and I'm going to impress them in a way that just looks like magic to other people, because I want to be sure that I can do it. Do you have
that's
that
really
kind
great.
of?
Yeah, I love how you think. Joel. Well, here's the thing. Yes, Archetypes at Work is co-created between myself and Richard Olivier, who is, of course, the son of Laurence Olivier, comes from a theater background. He's a theater director, and he has invented a thing called mythodrama, with which he has done leadership development for well over 20 years around the world with his models, basically using Shakespeare as a leadership story. Very, very much embodied. He's had people, jump around in the room. There are very high executives for a long time all around the world. And jump around the room is, it's tongue in cheek. But yes, and so Archetypes at Work is also mythodramatic. In other words, it is very, very embodied. And not only do we have gestures for all the archetypes, which you can see at archetypesatwork.com/gestures. Richard there embodies them and shows you how you can step into any one of them physically. I know people who, before they go into a meeting and they think, this is a meeting, I really have to get my point across. I know people are going to be aggressively attacking my ideas. I have to be in my warrior. And so what they do is they they go into the bathroom, they do the warrior gesture a couple of times, and they go into that meeting and they're pumped up. It's a great thing to do. And I know of someone who just won a contest, as a musician, who swears that if she hadn't stepped into her sovereign before she stepped out on stage and won, she wouldn't have done so forth. So yes, it's a very embodied language. We also use sound, music, poetry, all kinds of other right brain accesses to activate these archetypal models in ourselves. You can play the archetypes game with anything. If it's a set of glasses, you can say, what would a warrior carpet look like? What would a sovereign carpet look like? What would a lover carpet look like? And so on, or a piece of, or some food. All of it is translatable. It's a way of seeing. I already gave you a lover food, the chocolate mousse. Maybe a warrior food is, I don't know, a steak, or a very spicy food, or very hot food, or very fiery food, or something like that. So you can play with these. When you start to develop the language, everything becomes very much alive. Like I said, that's developing the archetypal eye.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the forces are there, whether or not we recognize them. A lot of times it's never an actual clinical psychologist. It's always somebody who's just taken their first research 101 class that sends me an email and says I shouldn't have a license because they Google something and get on the podcast. But I think that moment that the precuneus forms in the brain, all this information is there being processed, but we're not perceiving it yet. And then when the precuneus the little seed of that is formed, 1,000,000 years later, you have the Venus of Willendorf, because perceiving ourselves becomes hard. When we're unconsciously just processing the information, there's such a difference in those things. It's a birth of something. And the people that send me that email, I write back and I say, you don't have to notice any of this stuff. You can go your whole life and not notice it. But somehow if somebody on LinkedIn or something, when you see all this subjectivity and intuition, it's such a waste to not engage with it, because you see this subjectivity and intuition and transcendental function and symbolic thinking get projected onto these other things. Like the person that says anything but CBT isn't evidence-based and you have to do therapy like a formula, and there's a manualizable form of it, we could let an AI do it. When you look at that person's Facebook page, you see conspiracy theories and wild religiosity, after
Exactly.
they tell you how to practice therapy.
Exactly. I would like to know what this person is so afraid of. I would be quite compassionate and say, what are you so afraid of? Why is it such a threat to your thinking that somebody thinks differently? Or why is it such a threat to your thinking? Not try to convince them that the way you and I think is better, but just why is it such a threat that things that aren't measurable are real to some people? Why is that so difficult? It's the same thing with religion. For some people, religion is incredibly, incredibly real. So why should we tell them that they're nuts, or that that's wrong, or that it's it's a belief system, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of seeing the world. It's just because it's not measurable doesn't make it real. To someone who's religious, religion is very, very real. And so and everything is infused by it in the way they see everything. It's a way of seeing. It's perfectly okay with me, and there's lots of different ways. But to claim that it's the only way of seeing, or that every other way of seeing, including other religions, is wrong, that's where the problem is, because that's not recognizing that you're in a tree. But that becomes absolutism. Anybody who has the truth, be CBT, or be the truth be a religion, sorry, but nobody holds the key to truth. It's just there's no such thing. And it doesn't mean everything is relative. It means that there are objective ways to distinguish that what different people believe has its own place. That's all. Well, and the different trees are different mindsets. I mean, it goes all the way back to Aristotle and Plato, to those conversations that between left brain and right brain. It goes right there. And having to pick a side, I think, is a mistake. What if we could have both in our brain? Wouldn't that be way cooler? And that's totally possible, because we're all wired that way.
Yeah, the two schools of thought, the academy, and that. And I think when you look at the relationship that we have, one of the things that's scary about what you're doing, or what Jung's doing, or any kind of depth work, is you're telling people that philosophy and anthropology and psychology have to be the same discipline, in a way where people who are afraid of a part of themselves are going to say, no, you can't bring that into it. But in the same way that you can get a philosopher who's overly logical to tell on themselves, you can do that with psychology. You can look at a model of therapy and say, What are you afraid of based on how they define the self? And in something like you do, it's very open-ended. You're not pretending to know. The person is engaging with the self that is you're not in control of. Something like CBT is limiting the self down to cognition and behavior, which to me is something that, and they would say that, well, if you follow it, it goes down to belief. But look at those beliefs; they're not terribly deep. That's a step in the wrong direction.
Literally not deep, right? So
but something like ABA that says you're only other people's ability to perceive your behavior, that is terrifying. I mean, applied behavior analysis is so scary because it's saying there is no self. You are only what other people see. That's worse than cognitive therapy.
Yeah. And there's a lot. The problem is that right now, I think things are going to shift, and the fastest growing school of psychology that you can't even get into right now, I've been told, is internal family systems, a multiple model. That's very hot right now. So these things come and go. Right now, the behaviorists and CBT has pretty much dominated the insurance industry and what people get paid for, and what is real and what is acceptable and what is therapy. That's fine. There's always going to be those of us who aren't in that model, and that number is growing. There's now other things like eco-psychology and embodied psychology and all these kinds of things. And of course, archetypal psychology has become huge. There's a whole new way of thinking that as the world changes and the values change in the world, and that left brain thinking just isn't enough anymore, the need for something more is going to come really quickly. And so, I have a classic Psych 101 book, that's an inch and a half thick. It has a quarter page of Jung and Freud. So as a side note, as sort of a mistake, yeah, these guys existed too. They believed in this deep stuff and things like dreams. I mean, can you believe it? Kind of like that. I mean, I find that sad. And my nephew has a classic psych degree from somewhere, and he doesn't practice it in any way. But I remember when he was in school, what he was telling me, what he was doing, it was just like, I just thought it was that. It's so left brainy, and it's all biology based, and it's fun to do that. It's science, but don't call it psychology. It's biology. And
you're weeding out everybody who isn't beneficial to the market by applying that kind of reductivism to psychology.
Yeah. Exactly. And, psychology has the word psyche in it, which means soul. There's not a lot of soul in most CBT. In fact, there's none. So, it's not for me. It worked for some people. It's great. For certain things, if I have OCD, probably, CBT is pretty useful. However, I've had some pretty good results working with OCD people as well by understanding the archetypal pattern and finding a different way to do it. Wow, what a revolutionary thought. That actually works. So to me, in the end, the only thing that matters is how things work. To me, I like to see usefulness. Again, we're back where we started. If it's not practical, if it's not useful, if it's just based on the theory, I don't care about it. But I've had more people tell me that, 1 hour of getting an astrological reading has changed their life, and they've been in therapy for 30 years and they never got to the same depth. I've had people tell me that many, 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 many times, probably literally hundreds of times. So then I think there's some value to what I'm doing. I'm not saying the therapy is wrong. I'm not a therapist. But what I do is do sort of the x-ray and then work with a therapist. I think I have 19 psychiatrists in my clients. I checked that the other day for something else. So people who are therapists, and I can't think about how many therapists I have as clients. So people who understand the value of getting insights and then working with them. And so I think what an astrologer can do is give the insights to the therapist, like you said, and then the therapist does the therapy work. There's nothing wrong with that. But those insights can, shave 6 months off of therapy, and you don't need to know the past. You don't need to know the history with a person when you have an astrology chart. You can see all of it right there, and it's a very powerful tool. It's just a tool, but it's a useful tool. To me, if you're a medical doctor, someone walks in with a broken arm, you're a country doctor, and you say, yeah, I think I can set it pretty well, and then we'll put a cast on it, it'll grow back straight. Yeah, that's probably pretty good. But imagine how much better you would do with an x-ray. So we provide the x-ray as astrologers. The therapist still then has a much better way of setting the arm and setting it straight. So yeah, I think that's the gift. It's understanding people's place, and it's not disrespecting people who think differently. I think that's the main message from today. Just because someone does something you don't understand or think is weird or think is difficult or think is doesn't match your model of reality, doesn't make it wrong. And tolerance is a nice thing. Is just to say, I'm curious, tell me more about it. Then I'll make a decision once I've actually studied it. I've studied it, you've not, kind of a thing, like Newton said. That's powerful.
Well, that's beautiful. I want to be respectful of your time. We'll definitely link to your website and where people can reach out and get more information on either being trained or receiving help. If they are a leader, if they do have one of these companies. Are there any books or other services you want to point people to? That would be
all of that is on the websites. And so I want, I don't want to have a website where people, to me, this kind of work is very personal. So yeah, a lot of information is on the websites, and that's lovely. But to me, if someone really wants to talk deeper about something, or really talk about a problem they're having at work, let's talk. Let's have a conversation, and then I can show them how the archetypal model could help them, solve some of these very common issues that they're not the only ones who have. But it's a novel approach that is, to me, much more efficient and effective, and people love it because it is so fun. It's like, wow, I've been seen, I've been looked at properly. Somebody cares about me enough to do this assessment with me, and now look at how my relationship has changed. I know tons of stories of people who didn't talk for years in a company, and now they do because they have this archetypal language. There's so many different ways you can apply this. It's a really useful tool. It's just a tool, but it is a very useful tool. It's like one of those multi-tools, you can use that has everything on it.
Well, that's beautiful. That's a wonderful intro to your work, and I hope that this connects you with some people who want to learn more about those things. So we can leave it there, and I will link to all of these things below.
But we move like Roman soldiers into the wilds of the psyche, to fix under a canceling star, Hermes and Aphrodite, sipping on a sunlit juice.